Hey, good morning and welcome to another Tuesday morning. You know what time it is? It's 10 a.m. That means it's another edition of the Kitchings Table. Good morning. I'm your host, Earl Kitchings. Joining me, Ronline Cannady. Good morning, Ronline.
Good morning.
How are you doing this day?
I am doing well. How about you? You looking
I'm
good today?
I'm trying to do the best I can on a Tuesday. So we are ready to give you another show. This is the final episode, a chapter that we'll do in the month of March, being that it is Women's History Month. And we want to make sure we close out the month with some very astute information. And I believe Ronline has done a good job of researching this today. And, you got so many different types of women who do so many different things from so many different industries and different career paths and things of that nature. It's really kind of hard just to focus in on a few without leaving out a few, but this is what happens. And I think that for those who we missed, we apologize that we did not bring you some information from those particular careers or those particular industries. What we attempted to do was identify what we thought would be interesting. And then there are some things or some areas that don't get covered a whole lot. So we wanted to give you some information about them because some women, you hear a lot about, i.e., the vice president. Well, we know we have a black female, black vice president. We know that. But if you were to investigate that and ask, well, who are some of the ambassadors that represent this country around the world, who may be black females or who may be serving in the high echelons of law enforcement, uh, those aren't always the ones we hear about or know about. So we've made an effort to just look into giving you, as they say, an a la carte menu of people and where they are from and who they are. So today, I think we're going to be dealing, or I know we're going to be dealing with the spiritual side from the ministries part. So, Ronline, I'm going to let you take us into the first half of today's show that is brought to you on Awesome Radio, WBISLP 106.9 FM, Roku, GPAC 23. You could catch us on Facebook Live and YouTube if you choose to catch us on a later date or time. But Ronling, would you just go ahead and give us the intro to who we're going to be talking about in this area of spiritual leaders and spiritual ministers?
Yes. So thank you so much. And this has been um, a true gift, I would say, that we have been given to be able to recognize the spiritual leaders through so many facets. They have fought through many adversities. One is being, how would I want to say that, dealing with sexism and feminism and all of those things that they have been discriminated against, for one reason or the other. So I just want to be able to recognize a few today. There are many trailblazers in the ministry and their importance. They're trying to tighten the gap, for inequality. You know, we often hear about the different discriminations with the gender and um, how we're supposed to function, as women in the country, around the world. We're not supposed to have anything to say, and yet we are the ones, as in women, who, you know, dealing first and foremost in the teaching environment, starting at home with our children. So when we think about coming outside of the home into being productive citizens, the women are expected to make sure that their children are functioning on a productive side. And, of course, the fathers are there in some instances, but it's the mothers that are expected to um, bring that be that nucleus, if you will. So I wanted to recognize first up is paying homage to our first African American women to be ordained in the U.S. And I want to start with Jarena Lee, and she was the first African American woman to be granted the right to preach in an African Methodist Episcopal AME church, and she was authorized to preach by Reverend Richard Allen, the founder of the AME Church in 1819. And she wasn't ordained as a minister per se, she was ordained as a deaconess, but she was allowed to preach and she preached abroad as well. So I want to just take a moment to say why um, spiritual counseling, if you will, spiritual teaching, if you will, is so important in our society. Is because it keeps you grounded. It gives you a foundation of belief. And the foundation of belief is so important. And I think this is what has happened throughout the world is that belief system has been compromised. It has been compromised in such of a way until you can see it. Um, the tragedies that has happened because people have lost hope. And so again, with the women um, raising their children, and then of course, Earl, you can attest to this as well, there is always in the block that one home that everybody gravitates to because that mother is home, that mother is an encourager, that mother is there to chastise, to put that person back on track, to go out into the world and say, hey, I can look back and say that one neighborhood mother is the reason why I'm where I am today because she didn't play, that kind of thing. So weigh in on that for me, Earl.
Well, in the time that I was growing up, I think the standard, I think what most parents allowed and what was just a natural thing in our neighborhoods was that any adult who saw you out of line could put you in check or could discipline you uh, almost without the parents' permission per se. But if you're in that neighborhood and your parents knew neighbors and the neighbors were basically giving a green light to discipline or say something to you to put you back on track as they chose to, and then they would report to the parents what happened if you didn't. And of course, if you choose not to, they're gonna find out anyway. And then if something like that did occur, then the parents would also uh, give you sterner discipline than what your neighbors may have done. Now, for some of us, like you had a parent or parents who lived next door across the street from you that might have been like your parents, and they could discipline you just as well as your parents could, not just with words, but as we said back in those days, you would get a whooping. I know that's not appropriate in this day and time, but the Bible speaks of sparing the rod and spoil the child. So I don't know if whooping is what the Bible meant when it says don't spare the rod, but a whooping is what you got. And I think that aspect of discipline in our days led to parents and other adults in our communities being able to discipline children and making children know that someone else is watching what you're doing and what you're saying. And if you don't think so, step out of line, and when you get home, you'll know so. So you want to stay in line. I never like losing my perks or benefits by doing something I had no business doing, because man, when you lose your perks and benefits, just like in the real world, they take your benefits away. Some things you can't do, and sometimes those benefits don't ever come back. And I think one of the mainstays in growing up when you got to be about 15 or 16 was the opportunity to drive the car. And if you lost the benefit or the perk of driving that car when you wanted to, because you did something you didn't have any business doing, you'll think two or three times the next time you step out of line. So I made sure, for me personally, stay within that boundary, because you don't want to not have an opportunity to go somewhere or have that freedom to go somewhere because you have use of the car. So that was how we were brought up, and I think we turned out okay. I don't know. I think we did.
I think y'all did as well. As a matter of fact, I look up to you, so that's my disclaimer. That is my disclaimer. And so I want to talk about Deaconess Lee's impact on the AME Church and the wider religious community. It was significant. Her success as a preacher challenged traditional notions of women's roles in the church and paved the way for other women to take leadership roles in the AME Church and beyond. It says she also played a key role in the establishment of the African Methodist Episcopal Zion, which is known as AMEZ Church, which split from the AME Church in the early 1820s. So I think that is the significant pathway, and I'm glad that she pressed on to do what she needed to do. When you have that calling upon you, you can't fold that calling in a box at all. It's just like a teacher who is led to teach. They're often given something to say and to put people in the direction or pathway that they need in order to keep moving forward and to become um, great at whatever it is that they set out to master. So the next person I want to talk about, well, before we go there, there's an autobiography that's available called "Religious Experience and Journal of Miss Jarena Lee." It is an important historical document that provides insights and experiences of the African American women in the 19th century. All right, so the next person we have is Reverend Julia A.J. Foote. She was a prominent African American Methodist minister and evangelist who was ordained as a deaconess in 1884. And then in 1894, she was ordained as an elder, becoming the first woman to be ordained as a reverend in the African Methodist Episcopal Zion Church. And so her Reverend Foote's key things for her is that she focused on journalism. She focused on evangelism and social justice and also women's rights. And just thinking about that in the early 19th century as she was coming along, being a trailblazer, as in for social justice, evangelism, and women's rights, to be able to open up more roles for women to be able to take a part in and to be able to master the skills that were needed in order to take things abroad as well. So my hat goes off to those women of not allowing us to be folded in a box, if you will. Um, what do you think about that, Earl? Because I know you saw a lot of discrimination as you were coming along in the churches.
Well, discrimination, I don't know if I saw it so much in the churches as I just saw it in society as general. I think on Sundays when we went to church, that would probably be the least time you would see any discrimination, simply because everyone went to their church, whether it be Baptist, Episcopal, United Methodist, Presbyterian, COGIC. it didn't really matter when you went to church on Sundays. You pretty much were isolated from the norms of society during the segregation era. So I don't think we saw it as much as we saw it during the time of maybe going to school, maybe at the time of going somewhere to buy items from stores, whether it be a grocery store or a retail store, or any other type of general social things that we did, where we saw the discrimination a lot more so than in church. It's interesting that you brought that up, Ronline, because it's been said that Sunday is the most segregated day of the week. So when you ask me the question about, I guess, discrimination doing from a religious perspective, didn't really see it from that perspective, but come Monday through Saturday, you saw it some of everywhere. And thank goodness that those times did come to an end, although there seems to be a movement to restore those times.
Yes, that is fortunate to go backwards in the 21st century when we have come so far. And of course, Dr. Bernice King stated, so eloquently, even though her parents, they were trailblazers, as in to make sure that we have the liberties, if you will, to be able to do the things that we've done without being discriminated. Is so much work, so much more work to do. And at the moment when she was talking about it, I had no clue of what she was talking about, on the level that I understand it now, more so since, our governor has um, caused a war just dealing with the educational system. And of course, if he's actually seeking the presidency, it'll be a war on a nation where all of that is concerned. So we have to be so mindful of our leaders and where we're placing them and what they believe in, and to get to the bottom of what they actually believe in. It's like, I remember being called on the carpet so many times, and okay, well, what is it that you believe? That kind of thing. And so I saw the discrimination a lot because my parents both were ministers, and there were places where my father was called to preach. And when he went, of course, my mother and father, they were there together, both ministers. And, they offered her to sit in one place, and while they offered him to sit in another place, because they didn't allow women ministers, period, to be a part of the service or whatever, no more than the singing and the praying, and that's it. So to go into the lane of preaching, to experience that in the 60s through the 80s, and some of the 90s as well. But I'm thankful that we're seeing more and more women today that are being recognized in the ministry.
Well, when you speak of that particular aspect of women in the church and the discrimination, from a perspective of there not being many female ministers when I was growing up, that was the norm. You did not have many female ministers in any denomination uh, sharing the word at that time. And of course, like so many other things that were going on at that time, it was such a male dominated world that even amongst black churches, there were not many, if any, female ministers at the time. And as the females started to find opportunities and become ministers, not only as associate ministers, but then become ministers and pastors of their own churches, you've seen a swell of and rise of ladies who are just doing phenomenal jobs of leading, both spiritually and as human beings, to help guide people to where they need to be or what they're seeking, both in a spiritual realm and just a human realm. So that discrimination, yes, there was that amongst black churches when I was growing up because you just did not see female pastors or female ministers. But I don't think it was going to be long before that changed in um, churches. But you have to remember that because of who was leading the churches at those times, because of the bishops and who they were, and because of their thinking and because of their upbringing, and because they felt that there was maybe no place or no reason to have females lead the church, at least from a pastoral standpoint, maybe like you said, a deaconess, maybe as high as some of them rose, but those times are gone. Fortunately, those times have changed, and you can now see that, uh, like Martha and Mary back in the times of Jesus were somewhat of maybe the predecessors to women being spiritual leaders because they did have somewhat of an input in some things that were done and said. But you made mention of something, and it caught my thought pattern when you talked about Dr. Bernice King, and I said, well, I wonder if there has ever been some light put on the fact of female ministers who were the children of prominent prominent male ministers who are now ministers themselves. And she came to mind because when you said Dr. Bernice King, then the first thing that comes to mind, and because I lived in Atlanta for a while, was Dr. Reverend Martin Luther King. And I think of all his children, she is the baby. She is the baby, I believe. She is the youngest of the five. She has taken on more of her father's work than the other four children have ever thought to do. And she does it with passion and she does it with fire. And I remember seeing her when she was young back in the 80s and just knowing that she was going to be someone to reckon with as she got older and more experienced because she was bringing it from a perspective just like her father was. So when you talk about a Dr. Martin Luther King, uh, I know that TD Jakes, his daughter is a minister. So when you think about the more prominent ministers and their children who have gone into, because a lot of children do follow in their fathers and or mothers' footsteps going into the ministry. It's just interesting to just think about, even here in Jacksonville, those ministers who have followed into their parents, father or mother, whichever footsteps as far as being ministers in their professions.
And you're so right about that. And so, Reverend Dr. Foote, she wrote several books, including her autobiography. It's called A Brand Plucked from the Fire, which documented her journey from slavery to ministry and provided insights into the social and political climate of her time. And I thought that was so interesting. As a matter of fact, I'm going to see, can I order the book, because I would like to know what she had to say, what she wrote about, and things like that. And, I'm just grateful that you're talking about Reverend Dr. Bernice King and what she's doing today. I got a chance to see her a few years ago when she was here in Jacksonville. And I tell you, when she got on that stage and she brought forth the word and she brought forth her message, you know, it was very powerful, very enlightening, and it just lit a match under me. And I wish, I could see more of her. I know we can do that streaming or what have you, but yes, she has that burning desire to do what needs to be done in order to cause wake up calls within us, to be able to call us to action. And that's one of the the things, and as far as spiritualism is concerned, you can't sit on the sidelines. You need to be able to get out there and do something to make a difference, just like Jesus did. Jesus, he called up the disciples and he called them to action. It wasn't any waiting on the sidelines, waiting for somebody to do something or whatever, because it's not going to be done. You have to do it.
This is true. And action is just that. When you're called to action, action is required and expected. And a lot of times, without the action, nothing gets done. And while hope is a good thing to have, hope is not an action word. Hope is not a do word. Hope does not deliver on getting something done. You have to take action. You have to do something. You have to take onus of doing something. And this is what creates and drives a lot of individuals, no matter what their profession or career paths are, whether they be working for someone or working for themselves. They're driven by action to make something happen, to deliver on what you want to happen, to progressively move something forward. And this is what has to happen in all aspects of our life and our being. We have to take action and move on it. And primarily, we want it to be positive action. So that's where we have to go with that.
Very good. And thank you so much for sharing your thoughts on that. So, for North Carolina, I want to recognize Dr. Reverend Cynthia L. Hale. Reverend Dr. Hale is a native of Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina, and is the founder and senior pastor of Ray Hope Christian Church in Decatur, Georgia. She's been a trailblazer in ministry because of her leadership in the church and her advocacy for social justice. So, congratulations, Reverend Dr. Hale, for coming out of North Carolina and taking your ministry on and doing such great work. The next person I want to recognize is Reverend Dr. Valerie Bridgman. Reverend Dr. Bridgman is a native of Goldsboro, North Carolina, and is a theologian and scholar who is the Dean and Vice President of Methodist Theological School in Ohio. She has been a trailblazer in ministry because of her scholarship on womanist theology and her advocacy for social justice. So those people, when I think about being a trailblazer in the ministry, and to have scholarships available for women who want to pursue that into that lane of theology, I think is just a dynamic thing to get into that spirituality of things, Christianity, if you will. The next person that came out of North Carolina is Reverend Dr. Jill Duffield. Duffield is a native of Wilson, North Carolina, and is a Presbyterian minister who serves as the editor of the Presbyterian Outlook. She has been a trailblazer in ministry because of her leadership in the church and her advocacy also for social justice, particularly in the area of immigration reform. Now, what do you think about that, Earl?
Well, I think all three of those ladies are very dynamic ministers in their own right. Each one of them have a vision for what they would like to see happen in their communities and in their churches, and the direction that they would like to take their congregations based on their vision. Also, their additional ideas that they tend to want to focus on. You mentioned women advocacy. You mentioned developing things that will help, I guess, make someone kind of holistic. And because they are wanting to be not only just ministers, but also have some input on other things that affect our society and the way we live. It's to be commended because we turn to our spiritual leaders so many times for not just help spiritually, but just for help in things that are affecting our lives. And when we have people who are diverse enough and broaden their vision enough to at least explore opportunities in other things, it helps them provide more information to anyone who might be needing help or assistance in something that may not be their specialty. So for these women to branch out the way they have, and I'm sure when they have their conferences and they have their workshops and seminars, those are some very mighty and powerful events that they have, and a lot of information and a lot of things are being shared to enrich people's lives, to make their lives better or to change their lives for the better. So continue to do that work, ladies, and it's just phenomenal to hear that we have this kind of women leadership in our churches and in our spiritual realms at this time.
Well, thank you so much. And now we're going to let you do the honors of our break.
Sure. This is the Kitchings Table, heard every Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. on Awesome Radio, WBIS 106.9 FM, WBIS LP. You can also catch us on Facebook Live, YouTube, Roku, and GPAC 23. Those are the social media elements that you can check to find us. And we hope that you choose to join us on Tuesday morning or whenever you choose to, because we're always looking forward to bringing in new information and bringing in new people to watch. And of course, if you have any questions or comments you would like to share with us, please send them to the radio station, WBISLP. And you can check the website for that at Awesome Radio if you're interested in sending us information or questions. Maybe you have somebody you would like for us to talk about or a topic you would like for us to talk about. We are very open to whatever and whomever we get information about. So there we have it, Ronline.
All right. And at this time, I want to take a time to take this time to recognize was that South Carolina women who for basketball made it into what they finished in the final four.
They
So
made it to the Final Four, yes.
yes, I want to take the time to recognize that we were out for dinner last night, and I just happened to catch the game and realize what happened while I
Mm.
was there at the restaurant. And I realized that they have made history for, Women's History Month. So I heard, them being talked about this morning on the news, and it just made me proud, because what would life be without sports, right?
There would be a lot of boring people in the world. They would have no life whatsoever because some people depend on sports so much for a lot of things to drive them each and every day. You have many millions of fans who are big pro sports fans from all areas of sports, even more millions who adore college sports, and even more who adore high school sports. So that's just a way of life in America that we have sports in all these different venues. And now that we see other sports coming on the scene, such as lacrosse is definitely making impact. Women's wrestling is making impact. Want to give a quick shout out to the women's rugby team of Howard University. Uh, I think Howard University is the only Black college in America with a women's rugby team. And ironically, they are undefeated at 9-0. So they're doing some amazing things. So as things diversify more, things get better and better. And I'm glad you made mention of the South Carolina, University of South Carolina Gamecocks and their coach. I think the coach is what really makes it uh, or puts the cherry on top. Coach Dawn Staley did make history by making it to the Final Four. If she can win this year, she would be in rare air when she would be one of maybe 5 schools who have ever won over 3 or more national championships. And she's done this relatively in a very short period of time, but she has become the Gino Auriemma and Pat Summitt uh, now of women's college basketball because she's won the championship. There's some other phenomenal ladies out there who are coaches. They just have not attained the success that Coach Staley has. And, the one good thing about Coach Staley is she's very well grounded because she makes sure that she recognizes things that need to be recognized. And she made at the last game she coached, she wore a jersey that had Cheney on it with the number 44. And that was in honor and respect to Coach Vivian Stringer, who was the first African American female basketball coach to take a black college to the national NCAA national championship when she did that for Cheney State back in the early 80s. And Don Staley, being from Philadelphia and being that Cheney State is in Philadelphia, she gave homage and recognition to Coach Vivian Stringer for that amazing, amazing opportunity that she gave those young ladies uh, over 35 years ago. So kudos to Don Staley. Kudos to some of the other black women coaches who got their teams to the Sweet 16 and to the Elite Eight, because there were 2 others. One coach from the University of Ole Miss got her team to the Elite Eight. And the coach of Notre Dame got her team to the Sweet 16. Although they lost, they got their teams to a place that some schools have still yet to embrace the glory of being one of the last 16 teams who are supposed to decide for the championship in the country. So once again, congratulations to Don Staley and the ladies of USC Gamecocks.
Oh, thank you so much, and glad you were up on it. I saw, um, what I saw, and it was like, wow. And then to hear about it on the news on Morning, Good Morning America, and I was like, wow. Let's say, go, ladies, go.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that's what they're doing. And it's just phenomenal to see because Dawn Staley was an outstanding basketball player in her own right when she played at the University of Virginia. 3-time All-American. I think she was the Player of the Year one year. To now be the head coach and lead these young ladies the way she's leading them is just speaks volume about her body of work. And I'm sure the University of South Carolina is not going to let her have any thoughts or ideas about even thinking about going someplace else to coach. When a coach like that has come and put that marker in, like Coach Auriemma at Connecticut, Coach Summit, who was at Tennessee for so very long, Coach Stringer, who went from Cheney to Rutgers. And when you talk about the men's side, you talk about Mike Krzyzewski, Dean Smith, John Wooden, these coaches who have had long, long careers at the same school. And that's what I foresee for Coach Staley. She'll just be that coach at South Carolina until she's ready to move on. And I hope they don't ever give her a reason to want to make a decision to move on other than saying, well, I've done my time here and it's time for me to retire.
Yes, yes, yes. It's good to be appreciated no matter where you are, because you give your all, you give your best, and from what I saw with that team last night, she definitely gave her all and her best, and
Well,
it made
they were on the ropes a little bit last night. Maryland gave them a game, and they were on the ropes just a little bit, but they pulled it out. So now they go to the Final Four, which to be one of the Final Four teams in college basketball at this time of the year to be playing for the national championship. It's a lot of pressure. And oh, by the way, South Carolina is undefeated. Oh, by the way, they're undefeated. So the pressure mounts, but as they say, pressure bust pipes. But then again, some people rise to the occasion when the pressure gets to be this heavy and perform at another level. So we're expecting to see Don Staley in South Carolina perform very, very well.
All right. Well, my hat goes off to them, and I will be following the team,
Okay.
now that you put all of that into perspective. All right. So let's go back to our ministers. I'm going to recognize Florida now. um, Reverend Dr. Joanne Browning. Browning is a native of Jacksonville, Florida, and is the co pastor of Ebenezer African Methodist Episcopal Church in Fort Washington, Maryland. She has been a trailblazer in ministry because of her leadership in the AME and her advocacy also in social justice. Did you know? Do you know her?
I do not know her.
Okay, okay. All right. And next is Dr. Cynthia Wilson. Wilson is a native of Miami, Florida, and is an executive director of the Center of Innovation in Ministry at Bethune Cookman University. She has been a trailblazer in ministry because of her leadership in theological education and her work in promoting innovation and creativity in ministry. And then last for Florida is the Reverend Dr. Renita Wims. Wims is a native of Jacksonville, Florida, and is a theologian and author who has written extensively on womanist theology and biblical interpretation. She has been a trailblazer in the ministry because of her scholarship and advocacy in women in ministry. Would you like to weigh in on that?
Well, again, three outstanding women who have moved themselves into a position of leadership and having visions to move not only congregations, but move issues that surround our country and our society forward. You caused me to also think that when we talk about these ministers, it's somewhat ironic when I think about it that we had a Dr. Martin Luther King who led a movement. And in a day and time when we have so many different ways of putting out information and disseminating information and getting people to hear about what we're doing, we have not, other than perhaps maybe Jesse Jackson, we have not had the spiritual leadership to come to the forefront as Dr. King did for a movement that was needed at the time. And I say that because we are in some very, very, very challenging and difficult days in 2023. And when we talk about the fact that there are a lot of individuals who are wanting to turn social clocks backwards, who want to go back to a time where people of color, Black people, don't have any say in how their lives will be lived and led, or what we can learn and what we can do and where we can go. When you keep hearing these individuals who are in leadership positions have this type of vision and thought process to cause people to follow them. Uh, Not saying that these ministers, whether it's male or female, have to be at the forefront. I'm just making a comparison saying when we had a situation, a Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King came forward to lead a movement, to lead a situation that was causing people to have challenges. And I say that because I kind of feel like we're back at that time now because we are being challenged. We are having things told to us and said to us, not just from a social standpoint, but I've seen a lot of information that the Attorney General, the Black Attorney General, Attorney Benjamin Crump, has been putting out about a lot of instances where police violence continues to take the lives of Black males in particular, but it is also happening to women, that police are being very violent with and taking lives, and probably expecting not anything to happen to them, but in some instances that's not going to be the case. So when we talk about where we are now and the leadership, not only the spiritual leadership, but from the social realm, and from a position of helping your people, helping Black people to understand what the fight is all about, so that we can be like they were back in the 50s and 60s, uh, because those things were real. As much as one or two or three governors want to not acknowledge the fact that those times happened and those things happened, and it's funny that people can now have one person dissent against a body of people and a change is made. We have to be very mindful of where we are. And I believe when we look to our spiritual leaders, we oftentimes want them to give us that same direction that Dr. King did, as he did. He would go to church and give his speeches, but as you stated earlier, it wasn't just a speech, it was speech, then action.
Mhm.
There was always action following. Whenever he spoke, there was always an action that followed. And whether that action was a march or a protest, a speech, whatever his action was, it was always something that he wanted people to do. We need you to act. That is the half of the word action is act, which means to do something. So I just brought that out simply because, in comparison, Dr. King, and when we talk about our spiritual leaders, sometimes we wonder, well, where are our leaders when we talk about these type of issues in this day and time, and when we have people wanting to, as they say, turn the clock back? How do you get people to rise up and stand up?
You're so right about that. And so I was reading just for as where the spiritual leaders are, what are they expected to do? And so they're expected to teach their people about, to educate them about poverty, how to come out of poverty. We are in what they say, the um, we got a well-oiled machine that's going on. We need to be taking advantage of it. We need to get the education that we need in order to be able to run these industries and things like that, to be able to participate in them, as well as go after those higher salaries. And when I think about the many opportunities that many people have had, and I for one has been one of them, it's like not many people want to step up to the plate to do whatever needs to be done in order to be able to take advantage of the educational process of that will lead them into a better salary and things like that. And I often ask all of the time, like, why did you turn that position down? You're qualified for it or whatever. And most of them will always say, I just didn't want the headache. Do you know what all you have to do? I just like the idea of being able to go home, when I'm done with work or whatever, instead of that following me. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So, with that being said, Earl, I'm going to let you do the closeout here today. And this has, for me, been educational as well to look into this industry as far as spiritualism and what it really means, or what we're supposed to be doing as spiritual leaders into our churches and communities.
Well, leadership is never going to be easy. It was never meant to be easy. If you think about it from biblical times, those people who are in the Bible, who have their names scripted there and were the leaders, it was not easy for them. It is not easy for our leaders today, spiritually, business, and otherwise. However, my position is that if you're going to lead, you always lead from the front. You cannot lead from the back or from the middle. You have to lead from the front. And some people are just not meant to be leaders. Some people just cannot deal with being a leader or leadership positions. And that's why we don't have as many leaders as we have, because like you said, people, the pressure, the responsibility, the expectation that comes with leadership, not everybody wants to step into that. And because everyone can't or don't want to step into it, it makes it even more important that the leaders we do have, we make sure that they are held accountable for what they do. And if you can just keep in mind what's going on, you'll be surprised as who's doing what. So this has been another edition of the Kitchings Table here on WBIS LP 106.9 FM. Until next week at 10 o'clock on Tuesday morning, I'm Earl Kitchings for Ronline, Cannady, saying have a great week and always do something good for somebody else. Take care.